2,000 years, it's evolved into one of the world's largest cities. A modern metropolis on a massive scale. Britain's capital, London. London is the product of phenomenal feats of engineering and construction. From railways to bridges to cathedrals to skyscrapers. Scientific innovation has helped London grow, often in the face of catastrophe. Now, the city faces its greatest challenge, from the river on which it was founded, the Thames. Since Roman times, the Thames has given London its reason to be, and the city has prospered. But the river that has nurtured London holds the power to bring disaster, unless science can tame it. This is the story of the people and events that built this great city.
We built this city. We built this city.
At first glance, it looks like any major metropolis. Glass and steel dominate its downtown skyline. Road and rail traffic snake through the low-rise landscape of suburbia. But this is no ordinary city. London dominates southern England. The city covers a massive 600 square miles. Every day, over 8 million people who live and work here make 27 million journeys on 8,000 miles of roads, using over 600 miles of railway and subway, and crossing 30 bridges.
In the last 10 years, London's become a fantastic place to work as a designer. And there's a bit of a renaissance going on now. There's been money coming in from the Far East, from the States, all over the place. Some of the very best architects and engineers in the world are working right here, designing bridges and skyscrapers, all sorts of things, in a way which we couldn't even have imagined even 10, 15 years ago.
But London couldn't be London today without its river. The Thames is a massive 215 miles long and up to 114 feet deep. It's London's artery, connecting the city with the rest of the world.
In the days of empire, all the big ships used to come into the port of London and deliver all the cotton and all the spices and everything that made London a really special place, came here down the river. And without it, London wouldn't exist.
But unlike rivers that run through other cities, the Thames is tidal. Its direct route to the sea means that twice a day, the water level rises and falls dramatically with the tides. But the tidal reach poses a threat. It puts the city at constant risk of flooding. When a depression from the Atlantic moves across the north of Britain and combines with high winds, it produces a massively increased tide, which is funneled into the Thames. In fact, historical records show that the Thames has burst its banks numerous times, often causing great loss of life. So how did such a huge city come to grow in what seems like such a vulnerable spot? The story of London and its river begins some 2,000 years ago. The year is 43 AD. Roman legions are on the march through southern England. Their mission, conquest. The Roman Emperor Claudius has sent 40,000 troops to quell the native Britons and establish a military base in the country. The Romans are quick to spot the strategic potential of the River Thames. On the hills of the northern bank, they establish a supply depot for their troops. London is born.
The Romans had a genius for spotting locations that would make great cities. And I think the moment they arrived by the Thames, they saw that this was the place for their capital. It's the lowest crossing point on the Thames, and also it provides opportunities to build harbour, a port. So on both those counts, London was obviously going to be an ideal site.
The reason for London's rapid growth in Roman times is, of course, the river. Near to the site of the present London Bridge, the Romans build a bridge of their own at the narrowest crossing point of the river. The first ever bridge to span the Thames, it stretches from the north bank to what was then a marshy island, now the London district of Southwark. By this southern walk, roads quickly link southern and eastern England with the north and beyond.
When the Roman legions arrive at the Thames, they need a secure crossing, and this immediately starts to attract trade, to attract development, to attract buildings. And this crossing point very rapidly is expanding and becoming a centre for trade and for political control.
But all this changes in AD 60. The British Queen Boudica sweeps through southern England, avenging the rape of her daughters at the hands of renegade Roman troops. After less than 20 years of prosperity, London is destroyed.
It is completely obliterated, completely wiped out, so that once the revolt has been suppressed, the Roman provincial authorities really have to start building it again completely from scratch.
Second time around, the Romans build more wisely. Archaeologists have uncovered a fabulous piece of Roman engineering, a giant city-wide wall. What makes the wall significant is what it's made of, not wood, but stone. The London Wall not only provides defense, its construction defines London's evolution from a town to a city.
The Roman Wall was a seriously gigantic undertaking and involved the mobilization of many thousands of people. It's certainly the most ambitious piece of construction the Romans undertook in their time here.
The stone comes from quarries over 70 miles away. Barges make an estimated 1,700 trips back and forth along the Thames, carrying over 1 million stone blocks. The wall takes some 10 years to build. It's at least 20 feet high and a massive 9 feet thick at its base.
The Roman wall was essentially a sandwich. Either side were neatly cut squares of Kentish stone, hard stone. The centre was quite simply rubble. It's like a sort of porridge mixed in with cement, poured in the middle, and then faced up on the outside.
By 250 AD, London is home to 30,000 people. The city wall encloses an area of over 300 acres. It defines the boundary of a planned and ordered city, a city with a grid of streets and imposing public buildings. It proves to be the last example of citywide planning that London ever experiences.
This piece of wall is a memory, perhaps, of the only time that London was carefully thought out, the only time that a central authority said, this will be how it is. Ever since then, it's grown organically.
London soon outgrows its military origins, but 2,000 years later, dramatic new evidence emerges which proves that the soldiers' camp had become a thriving, important town. On this building site in South London, archaeologists scan the area for hidden treasures before construction begins. The soil soon reveals its precious bounty. What they uncovered just a few feet below the surface was this stone tablet. It's the tablet's inscription that got archaeologists excited.
This is a particularly rare and very important find. The inscription's the earliest physical evidence of the name London. It's the earliest example we have of the name London being written down anywhere in the world.
Although the tablet is incomplete, experts have deduced that the inscription is a dedication to the gods. It was made by a Frenchman, Tiberius, who is now trading with the people of London.
He's come from the continent, crossed the waters, and is celebrating the fact that he is a successful trader in the city of London, a large city, new city in a new territory of the Roman Empire, which must have been an important place for him to be.
For 200 years, the city lives through its first golden age. Then, in 410 AD, the Romans abandon London as their empire falls. Without the Romans' commercial network, London falls into decline. But with its geographical advantages and mighty defenses, it remains an attractive base for new rulers. In time, the abandoned city comes back to life, and by the 11th century, it becomes the site for the country's royal government. The river again stimulates overseas trade, and soon the city is thriving. The population rapidly climbs to 40,000. But London is bursting at the seams, and the old Roman bridge is falling apart. Something has to be done. London's river today has 30 bridges. In medieval times, it has just one. In 1209, after years of repairing the old Roman bridge, the city finally enjoys a more permanent structure, the first ever stone bridge to cross the Thames. But it's more than a bridge. It's lined with buildings, shops, homes, a watermill, and even a chapel. In effect, it's an entire street suspended over water.
London Bridge was considered to be a wonder of the world. The bridge was a focus for London life from the beginning. It was a focus for commerce, for ceremonials. It was like a little world of its own, a city on a bridge.
The bridge takes 33 years to build and is an ingenious construction for the time. But for engineers, the most significant part of the bridge lies beneath the river, because the biggest obstacle facing bridge builders past and present is the Thames itself, or rather, its phenomenal tidal current. The Millennium Bridge is the latest to span the river. It opened in 2002. One of Britain's leading structural engineers, Chris Wise, helped design the Millennium Bridge. He knows the enormous forces exerted by the water here.
It's going faster than a man can walk, almost up to sort of jogging speed. And you can imagine if you put anything in the water, it starts to try and knock it over.
The Millennium Bridge is supported by two vast concrete piers sunk deep into the river. Even today, the Thames's current makes bridge building no easy task.
We spent so much time and effort trying to put in the foundations for the Millennium Bridge. The thing that tickles me is to wonder how on earth the guys at medieval times built the foundations for their bridge.
Chris Wise's medieval predecessor is an obscure London priest, Peter of Colechurch. In 1176, Colechurch begins construction. He uses a simple but effective technique to sink the foundations. A pile driver mounted on barges drives a ring of wooden stakes into the riverbed. Rubble is tipped between the stakes to form a solid surface on which to build the piers. But engineers now know that these piers would have been vulnerable to the relentless force of the river. At a maritime testing laboratory, Wise will test the effect of tidal flow on a scale model of basic medieval bridge foundations.
The particular thing we're worried about is whether or not the bed of the river close to this structure is going to survive. Just to give you an idea, I mean, there's 2,500 or 3,000 tons of water going down the Thames every second. And that's what the old London Bridge would have had to resist. I mean, they're huge forces.
The tank is filled with water. A wave machine generates a current. The result is inevitable. The bridge pier has developed a dangerous tilt.
It's pretty realistic as a demonstration of what happens if you put something fairly fragile in a very fast-flowing river. The bridge foundations would have gradually fallen into the river, and the bridge with it.
To get around this fundamental problem, London Bridge's medieval architect, Peter of Colechurch, uses an ingenious technique. He surrounds each pier with a boat-shaped island of rubble, each one 34 feet wide and 150 feet long. They're called starlings.
We can see the evidence is there to show that the starlings are unbelievably effective at holding the bridge up and protecting the foundations, because the bridge lasted for hundreds of years.
But after 600 years, the starlings become a problem. River traffic is so dense and ships so large that the bridge's low height and narrow arches are effectively blocking the western reaches of the river to shipping. Far from from being an entry point to the city, London Bridge is a barrier. It has to go. The bridge is pulled down in 1831 and replaced, but its impact on London's history is beyond doubt.
There's no question about it. London Bridge had a dramatic effect on the commerce and life of the country. London evolved as it has done because of the bridge.
Over the following 45 years, London spreads eastwards and urgently needs a new river crossing. While Old London Bridge was a barrier to shipping, any new bridge must allow ships to reach the heart of the river. The city runs a competition, and the winning design is today perhaps the city's most distinctive symbol, Tower Bridge. Tower Bridge owes a lot to its medieval predecessor. Note the starlings. Note the elaborate twin towers that give the bridge its name. But it's not just a homage to the past.
Hidden inside that medieval-looking exterior, there's a rather wonderful piece of Victorian engineering. And in its day, it was the biggest and most sophisticated lifting bridge in the world.
The genius of the design is that the bridge can act as a gateway, swinging open to allow tall ships to pass through.
Stand by, bridge staff. Stopping road traffic.
8 years in the making, the bridge contains 11,000 tons of steel clad in Cornish granite and Portland stone. Massive counterweights lift the bridge open in just 1 minute. It's a system still in use today. Down in the underbelly of the bridge, the Victorian machinery is kept in gleaming condition by the bridge technicians.
This is one of our beautiful Victorian driving engines. They were used prior to 1973 for raising the opening spans of the bridge for parts that actually raise up to let the river traffic come through. They're driven by hydraulic water into these pistons, which converted linear motion into rotary motion, which turned the drive shafts at the back. Now all this beautiful Victorian machinery has been superseded now by modern day oil hydraulic power pack units. The Victorian equipment was working lovely, but it was the operating cost of it. In those days you had a staff of approximately 90 people. Now with this new power pack units we've got a staff of 15.
Despite the new engines, all the bridge's mechanical parts are still functioning. But the bridge is more than just an example of outstanding Victorian engineering. It contributed to London's growth.
They built this thing, and it maintained all the trade, it maintained the vibrancy of the city, and it kept it as a real trading powerhouse. Without the wonderful lifting spans, that would never have happened. So the technical ingenuity allowed the port to continue.
Thanks to its port, but the river was also to bring disaster. In the winter of 1348, visiting ships arrive with a deadly cargo. Black rats carrying the bubonic plague infest the city. The rats quickly spread the untreatable disease. Once infected, the victims have no chance.
It was a quick death, but not quick enough. And it was an ugly death. They could be well at breakfast and dead by lunchtime. Their bodies would develop swellings, they would vomit blood, and they might become delirious. There were scenes of horror in any direction you could look.
The plague cuts a swathe through the city, killing an estimated 30,000 people, a third of London's population.
The city became silent. The river became silent. All trade ceased. All commerce ceased. All that could be heard were the tolls of the death carts in the city collecting up the corpses.
The plague remains a constant companion in London's streets and alleys, returning frequently in the years to come. Only one thing, it turns out, can stop it: fire. In the 17th century, London's population reaches 200,000. The city's medieval streetscape remains essentially the same, only denser. The wooden buildings more tightly packed, the city more polluted and overcrowded than ever before. It's a recipe for the biggest disaster to strike London since the Black Death. The date is Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. It's sometime after midnight. In London's Pudding Lane, Baker Thomas Farrinor goes to bed. He's certain he's extinguished the embers in his ovens. But Farrinor is wrong. It's the end of the summer. The weather is hot and dry. Strong winds from the river fan the flames. The densely packed timber houses burn easily. In 5 days of mayhem, 13,000 houses are destroyed. 80,000 people made homeless. Only the presence of the River Thames stops the fire spreading further. The Great Fire finally rids the city of the rats which had been spreading the plague through London's streets since medieval times. But this cleansing comes at a terrible price. Nearly 400 acres of the capital lie in ruins. Many Londoners leave, and the entire city centre must be rebuilt. But the challenge presents a fantastic opportunity for one of the city's leading figures. Sir Christopher Wren is a mathematician, astronomer, inventor, and architect. Wren devises a revolutionary plan to get people to return. He wants to reinvent London on a grand scale. A city filled with light, where grand piazzas link gracious boulevards that in turn lead to churches and majestic public buildings.
The idea was to reconstitute London and also to build it in a coherent form that would rival the continental capitals, and in particular Paris, our great trading rival.
To Wren's bitter disappointment, his plan is rejected. It falls victim to cost, politics, and vested interest. If his vision had been realized, London today would be a dramatically different place.
It was clearly easier for people to go back to the sites of their former buildings and construct on the old foundations. And obviously that effectively put a dampener on any form of coherent plan.
One part of his vision does make the transition from fantasy to reality. In 35 years of single-minded effort, Wren builds his masterpiece, London's largest cathedral, St. Paul's. Wren's design for St. Paul's was audacious and more radical than anything he had designed before. With one part of the building in particular, he was taking an enormous risk: the fabulous Great Dome. The dome itself weighs a colossal 67,000 tons. For centuries, it hovers over the city, seemingly visible from every street corner. But the construction of this gigantic dome requires revolutionary engineering, because its designer, Wren, is trying to build the impossible. This is the St. Paul's the tourists never see, inside the Great Dome. Architect Martin Stancliffe is the 17th surveyor of St. Paul's since Wren.
The more familiar you become with the building, the more one is overcome by amazement at the ingenuity of what he was doing, especially when you think that he'd never done anything of that kind of scale before.
Supporting the dome today are the original beams and brickwork now almost 300 years old. As the weight of the dome bears down on its supports, it exerts a phenomenal thrust. To counter this, Wren devised an ingenious solution that remains hidden to the naked eye: a chain of iron bars that encircles the base of the dome.
It lies within the masonry structure, so that you can't actually see that it's there. But if it wasn't there, the whole thing would effectively burst apart.
Upon its completion in 1711, St. Paul's immediately acts as a magnet, attracting visitors from all over the world. And it's a triumph that Wren lives to see. London's chance to reinvent itself as a modern city was gone. Even with new buildings, the city remains a jumble of cramped medieval streets, many of which survive today. It's what gives the older parts of the city its distinctive character, and tourists wouldn't have it any other way. Cramped or not, as the 17th and 18th centuries progress, London continues to grow both in size and wealth. By 1801, with almost 1 million residents, London is by far the biggest city in Europe. Foreign trade reaches a peak with the birth of the British Empire. The Port of London is now inundated with tea from India, silk from China, spices from the East Indies. But there's a problem. The waterfront wharves can barely cope with the traffic.
On the River Thames in the 1790s, there were 14,000 vessels a year trying to get into London. We're talking about the world's first industrialised nation. London was at the hub of that incredible empire of trade. The facilities which were laid out in Elizabethan times just simply couldn't cope with the forest of masts.
London's merchants have no choice. They decide to build new docking facilities. In the next 100 years, 9 new docks are built. It's a phenomenal expansion.
The scale of the London dock system is enormous. We're talking about the largest planned improvement in London since the Great Fire of 1666.
Vast areas behind the river are excavated to create giant parking lots for the ships. It's the largest engineering enterprise in the world.
There were scores of thousands of people employed on constructing the dock. Physical manpower, hard physical labour. At one time, these docks were employing hundreds of brickies to actually do the work. 20 million bricks alone for the docks and walls, another 20 million bricks for the warehouses.
The docks transform the face of the Thames and create a vast new London district, the East End. Thousands of people pour into the area to work in cargo handling, as well as in factories that grow alongside the docks. But more than just increasing the size of London, the docks also generate vast wealth for the city. Banks, insurance companies, and commodity exchanges all grow up on the trade coming in and out of the port. One business started off in a little coffee house in the city and eventually became Lloyd's of London, now one of the world's largest insurance companies. The docks served London well for 170 years, but in the 1960s, their time had passed. Modern techniques of container shipping and transport mean the docks become redundant. What had taken a century to build is dismantled in just a decade and a half. But the Docklands were to live again. In the 1980s, a massive redevelopment designed for both homes and businesses brings new life to London's historical East End. It's now one of the most modern high-tech areas of the city. Only an occasional crane is left behind to remind people of the area's heritage.
There came a time in the late 80s when London outgrew itself, and so it had to expand somewhere. And so they started to regenerate the old dockland areas. I mean, some people call it Chicago on Thames down there. The biggest skyscraper in London is down in the docks. And it's now a really thriving city. It's a place where you can live and you can walk to work in a completely new city, which is part of London, but at the same time separate from it.
When London uses it well, the Thames pays dividends for shipping, trade, and industry. But on occasion, abuse of the river costs the city a heavy price. By the 1850s, London is already a world-class metropolis with a population of almost 2.5 million. But the city's infrastructure is groaning under the weight and reaches crisis point when raw sewage overflows into the Thames, creating London's first environmental disaster. The sewage dumped into the river pollutes the city's water supply and helps spread a deadly disease, cholera. In 1848, an epidemic claims no less than 14,000 lives. A decade later, in June 1858, the smell of sewage known as the Great Stink becomes so bad, even the Houses of Parliament must be evacuated. Finally, the government is forced to act. As with the Great Fire 2 centuries before, crisis in London once again throws up a man of vision. This time, it's civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette is chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, the body that oversees all construction of public buildings in London. He has a plan to end London's sanitation problem, channel the sewage through a network of underground tunnels to purpose-built pumping stations safely outside the city. It's not glamorous, and Bazalgette's achievement is today largely forgotten.
When you look at the achievements of the 19th century, when you look at the Great Western Railway and the achievements of people like Brunel and Stephenson, you have to say that the London sewage system is up there, rivaling those other great engineers' achievements. But the thing is, it's been less well known up to now because it's underground. You can't see it.
Hidden or not, Bazalgette's sewer system changes the face of London forever. Indeed, it's still in use today. The scale of it is extraordinary. 1,000 contributory tunnels feed a network of main sewers. These are built at a gentle gradient, using gravity to channel the wastewater away. Feet below the surface, the pipes slope down 4 feet every mile. The tunnels are constructed using specially made bricks. The bricks are fired at high temperatures to make them more resistant to the corrosive effects of the wastewater. They remain in excellent condition. Peter Bazalgette is eager for his great-great-grandfather's work to be recognized.
It takes your breath away, literally, obviously, because of the aromas, but it takes your breath away just looking at the Victorian engineering. Nobody imagined when they built it in the 1860s that in the 21st century, 140 years later, this system would still be serving every Londoner who goes to the toilet.
Construction begins in 1859. 3.5 million cubic yards of earth are excavated. The tunnel system eventually stretches some 82 miles. The cost of the work in today's prices? Over $390 million. But there's a snag. The ideal material to hold the tunnel bricks in place is Portland cement. It actually gets stronger when exposed to water. But Portland cement is notoriously unstable and can break up unless made with exactly the right mix. How to choose the best quality cement? Bazalgette uses an ingenious but simple mechanical stress test.
I'm going to pull this lever up, lead shot will come into this bucket, and we'll see at what point this particular batch of Portland cement cracks. There she goes. So now all I have to do is take this bucket off with the lead shot in it and weigh it and see how many pounds per square inch was the pressure. About 340, which actually makes this a very good batch.
Bazalgette becomes so obsessed with the quality control of the cement, he insists every batch be tested. In fact, he's so meticulous about every detail that he's seen working at his desk day and night.
He worked 21 hours a day. There wasn't much time for anything except his work. We know that he wasn't a good delegator and that pretty well everything had to come under his nose. The work planning, the schedules, even tiny payments of money all came across his desk.
Bazalgette's effort pays off. London's sewage system opens in 1865 and is an overnight sensation. System is the specially built pumping station, currently being restored to its former glory. Here, the sewage is driven out to sea. The 4 beam engines built for the job are the largest of their kind. The sewage system is such big news that the inaugural ceremony is held here, conducted by 2 archbishops and the Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne.
They got into a barge and they sailed down the River Thames from the City of London. They had dinner,
in this cathedral of sewage, and the Prince of Wales turned on the first engine.
But while Bazalgette is putting the finishing touches to his underground sewage system, an urgent problem is developing on the streets above: congestion. With a swelling population and large numbers of commuters, traffic in London in the mid-19th century is as heavy as it is today.
It's a nightmare trying to move around any big city, and even today we can only move around London at about 10 miles an hour. In the old days they had a very similar problem. They had congestion and they had 2 million people trying to move around this city, but instead of cars they were struggling around with horses and carts. There were people driving cattle through the city to take them to market, and they even had commuters coming in on the fantastic Victorian railway system, but when they got to London it just locked up tight.
The solution lies not on the streets, but beneath them, with the construction of the world's first subway system. This station in central London is in one of the original deep-level tunnels which form part of the Piccadilly line. It's now unused, but its decaying walls reveal the secrets behind the subway's construction.
The thing about this tunnel is you can actually see very clearly the constructional techniques used to build it. It's entirely circular, unlike traditional Victorian tunnels which tended to be horseshoe or bell-shaped, which gives the name the tube, because that's effectively what you're standing in, a giant cast-iron lined tube under London.
And Londoners have called it the Tube ever since. But building the tube system needs radical new technology. Conventional Victorian tunnel construction is labor-intensive, expensive, and extremely dangerous. Fatal accidents are commonplace. The revolutionary solution that makes this circular tube tunnel possible is the brainchild of South African engineer James Greathead, inventor of the Greathead Shield. Greathead's idea was to build a large iron cylinder that could protect tunnelers as they dug, and at the same time allow for prefabricated sections of the tunnel to be assembled behind the tunnelers. A steel ring is pushed into the clay by the use of hydraulic rams. The tunnelers then empty the soil out from within the ring, and the rams are withdrawn, which allows another ring of cast iron linings to be placed behind it. The rams are then again forced forward into the clay. In May 1886, work begins on the world's first deep-level underground railway. By 1888, the men are averaging more than 80 feet a day, a phenomenal rate for the time.
One of the things about this system of building using the Greathead Shield is actually it was remarkably safe, it was remarkably quick, and it was an awful lot cheaper than using things like skilled bricklayers.
Londoners immediately take advantage of their new tube network. On its first day, 30,000 people use the Metropolitan line. By 1900, that number increases eightfold. And today, passengers in London make over 1 billion tube journeys a year.
Without the Greathead Shield, we simply wouldn't have the tube network here in London. The development of that steel ring that enabled them to safely and cheaply tunnel under London was a major engineering advance.
Even today, Britain's largest engineering project owes much to the Victorian ingenuity of James Greathead. Deep under the River Thames, a 12 million pound tunnel boring machine, or TBM, is excavating a tunnel 1.5 miles long. The tunnel will form part of the new high-speed rail link from London to the existing Channel Tunnel, which joins England and France. The TBM acts as a giant tube protecting workers as they assemble the tunnel lining inside it.
The process of pushing the tunnel boring machine forward off the previously built segments still stands today. We're using sophisticated machines for tunneling at tremendous speeds and through ground conditions that we never even envisaged. And none of that would have happened without Greathead than his original machines.
London grows at a phenomenal rate as the tube is extended to the suburbs and the city can accommodate millions more workers. Between 1921 and 1931, London's size virtually doubles as a result of the tube's expansion. It seems as if nothing can stop the relentless rise of the capital. But as the decades of the 20th century roll on, events were soon to cast a giant shadow over the city, suburbs, and all. At least once in its history, the Thames is a traitor to London. 1940, World War II is underway and Britain is locked in a life-or-death struggle with Hitler's Germany. Armadas of Nazi warplanes head for London. The River Thames is a landmark that cannot be covered up or blacked out. It guides the bombers well.
The River Thames led directly to the city and no amount of camouflage could hide it. The German bombers flew in across the estuary, across the Kent coast, hit the River Thames and simply turned left into London.
The bombers strike first at the city's commercial heart, the docks. Day and night, the bombers unload their deadly cargo of high explosives on the wharves and warehouses of the waterfront. The worst raid of all comes on September 7th, 1940.
They blasted the docks and warehouses of the Port of London incessantly for the whole of the following night and the next day, Sunday the 8th of September. They turned the docks and walls below into an inferno of smoke and flame. Hundreds of people were killed, thousands were injured, and millions of pounds worth of property was destroyed in 24 hours.
But the docks are not the only target. Soon the whole of London is suffering a nightly assault. Not only is the city under attack, but 2,000 years of history too. Londoners call it the Blitz.
The effect on the morale of the people of the Blitz itself was devastating. Some people reacted like heroes, some people went down into the underground shelters and the authorities feared they'd never come out again.
By war's end in 1945, 1/3 of London lies in ruins. Now begins the city's biggest rebuilding program since the Great Fire almost 300 years earlier. Today, London is thriving, a center of government and business, technology and design. But the River Thames, the city's oldest friend, still poses a threat. Being a tidal river, it's prone to bursting its banks, and London is no stranger to the terror and tragedy that flood can bring. Rewind to 1928. The night of January the 6th is unusually cold. In the densely populated riverside districts, residents descend from upper floors in search of warmth. One father decides to move his 4 daughters down to the coziness of the basement. It's a decision with dire consequences. At 1:30 a.m., the Thames bursts its banks. The flood first engulfs the Houses of Parliament and the foot of Big Ben. Water rises 4 feet above street level. Desperate rescue attempts are made, but for those caught in the basements, there is no escape. 14 people are drowned, among them the 4 girls. The 1928 disaster is not the last time London is menaced by flood. The river overflows again in 1953. For decades, the only flood defense available to London was the simple sandbag. And the only explanation for flooding was heavy rain and high tides. But today, experts fear an even greater threat. When a deep Atlantic depression moves across the north of Britain and combines with a high tide, it produces what meteorologists call a storm surge, a massively increased tide. As the coastlines of Europe converge, this vast volume of water is funneled into London.
Storm surges happen most severely where the geography of the coastline accentuates the arrival of extra water, and I would say that the North Sea is probably just about the most prone part of the world for these particular disasters to happen.
Incredible as it may seem, storm surges are relatively common. They can run up to 15 feet higher than the highest Thames tide. Protecting London from catastrophe demands a bold solution, and this is it, the Thames Barrier. It's the world's largest movable flood barrier. In times of danger, this phenomenal structure can hold back surge tides of up to 20 feet high.
If the Thames Barrier were not there, or it failed, then floodwaters would pile up the Thames into central London. We're talking about millions, billions of gallons of water here. The underground system would be knocked out straight away. There would be several feet of water in the streets of the city. Without adequate warning, many, many lives would be lost.
Work on the barrier began in 1974. It took 8 years to complete. It's the first time a man-made structure will attempt to both stop and start the flow of a major tidal river to give London total control of the Thames. Between the 7 starling-shaped piers, hidden under the water lie giant steel gates. When the flood warning comes, the gates are raised, forming a continuous wall of steel, drastically cutting off the river's flow. The Thames Barrier became operational in October 1982. It defended London from dangerous storms just 4 months later. The barrier is so vital to London's flood defenses, it's tested every month. Barrier controllers receive meteorological data from around the British Isles. 6 hours before high tide, the order is given to start the closure. The closure procedure is critical. If the gates are closed too quickly, there's a danger of creating a so-called reflective wave that could bounce back, causing drastic interference to shipping. But once in position, each of these gates can withstand a force of 9,000 tons. For now, London is safe behind its wall of steel, but the Thames may not be done with London yet. Some experts believe that future storm surges will get bigger, more powerful, thanks in part to global warming.
An increase in global temperatures will result in more severe and more frequent Atlantic storm surges, and increasing intensity of storm surges during the 21st century might render the Thames Barrier itself obsolete.
Experts predict that within 20 years, surge waves big enough to breach the barrier could threaten the city, and London's engineers will once again be put to the test. London is Britain's phoenix. War, destruction, fire, disease, flood. No matter what fate throws at it, the city always rises again. Central to its survival are timely innovations in science and engineering. And structures like the London Eye, the world's largest observation wheel, epitomize this spirit. London's final challenge remains the taming of its ever-powerful river. But for now, its citizens can preserve their 2,000 years of history and celebrate the people who built this city.